We all know that abortion is one of the most polarizing and hot-button issues of the last 50 years. And today, I want to explore with you what the Bible says about the sanctity of life and how you can gently and wisely engage with those who have an unplanned pregnancy and don't know what to do. Stick around. This is really important.
Welcome to this edition of Living on the Edge with Chip Ingram. The mission of these daily programs is to intentionally disciple Christians through the Bible teaching of Chip Ingram. And in this program, we're diving into a subject that has been the source of conflict between families, political parties, even churches for the last 50 years. So today, as we continue our series, Caring Enough to Confront, Chip will provide a thoughtful analysis of abortion. What are the facts? What does each side believe? And because this issue has such deep emotional responses, he'll remind us why it's critical to lead with grace when we talk to those who think differently. So with that, settle in as Chip begins his message, Understanding Abortion.
It's near quitting time. You're at your office and you're packing some things up and there's a light tap on the door. It's Debbie. She's 29 years old. She's an up-and-coming executive. She's on the fast track, huge potential. And she asked just before you leave, can I get a moment? I need to ask you something. You kind of stop unpacking, go to your desk, invite her to sit down. And the second that she needs ends up 45 minutes. Debbie begins through tears to talk about the man that she thought was going to be the answer to her dreams that was in her life and is now gone, and she's 3 months pregnant. She's on the fast track and she doesn't know what to do. And she turns to you and says, I know you're a good person and you're my boss. What should I do? What would you tell her? And why would you say that? Scene number 2. You sit down to eat dinner and you just, wow, the day's over, it's great. The phone rings, you look down, you press the button, you're not going to take it right now. And within seconds, a text pops up and it says, Amy, I really need to talk to you tonight. Amy, wow. It's a 16-year-old girl that you've known her since she's 4 or 5 years old. Great family friends. You vacation with their family. You've seen her grow up and be this amazing student. She has a volleyball scholarship ahead of her. And she said, I just got to talk to you. She comes after dinner and you go into the study and close the door and spend some time, and she relives that moment that she was so excited about 3 months ago when that guy that is so popular and so cool asked her to go to the prom. And the dream of going out with that super good-looking guy turned into the nightmare of her life. And she became a statistic of date rape. But she felt so overwhelmed and so ashamed and didn't know how to handle it. She just shut it down. She has told no one, not her mom, not her dad, not her sister, not a girlfriend. But you've been in the high school ministry and a family friend, and you're safe. And with tears flowing down her eyes, she goes, what can I do? I mean, this will ruin my parents' reputation. My dad is a leader at the church. My mom teaches women's Bible studies. What would you tell her? Why? Scene number 3 is June. She's 41 years old. You really like her. She's real rough around the edges. She's been a Christian about 18 months. She kind of doesn't know the social graces of when to talk about what. She's a little bit loud. She has 4 kids, comes from a difficult drug background, has 4 kids by 2 different guys. But it's so exciting to see what's happened to her life, and she's really changed, and she's growing, and she's got a great job now and supporting the kids by herself. And she pulls you in the hall, and people are listening, and you know this is inappropriate. She goes, look, I got to ask you a question. You remember my husband, when he came back, I tried to work it out, and then he left for good? While he was here, I found out just yesterday I'm pregnant, and I've got 4 kids, and I can't miss a day of work, and I sure can't handle 5. You've been a Christian a lot longer than me. What should I do? And why? Regardless of where you find yourself landing on the issue of abortion, it's one of the most pivotal, volatile issues in America today. And it's an issue that just isn't out there. This is what happens inside of all kinds of churches. So what would you say to that person? Not just what do you think, but what do you believe and why? When this topic comes up, usually it's like missiles being fired at two different groups. I mean, there's heat, anger, often violence. And so we're going to take a little bit different approach and lean back and do a thoughtful analysis. We're going to look at some research. We're going to look at what Planned Parenthood says and what the Right to Life groups say, and we're going to evaluate where they've been, where they are now, look at the evidence, because I'll guarantee in the next few years, either you'll have an experience where you don't need to know the answer to those questions, or someone will ask you, or you've already had one where you really need to know, where's God in all of this? So open your teaching handout, if you will. And to begin, I want to frame the issue. And as I frame it, it's very interesting. I need to do sort of a then and a now. Because if you don't get the history, it won't make sense to you. Planned Parenthood, this is from their literature, basically had three premises. Premise number one, as you read the literature, they talked very little about the pregnancy. They did not use the word baby. The focus was on the mother, her rights, her feelings, her needs, the quality of her life, and the unborn fetus, not baby. Premise number two was the anguish she was going through, the pain, the numerous reasons why an abortion was a live option for her. And then third, the basic reasoning was the who of the mother versus the what of the fetus. And the fetus was a mass of tissue, an appendix, if you will, and it's not different than getting your literal appendix out or wisdom tooth. And who's to tell a woman what to do with her body? That was the Planned Parenthood statements. The Right to Life position, on the other hand, was very simple. This group believes that life begins at conception, that the developing fetus is a full-fledged human being. It's not fully developed. And so at conception, the Y and X chromosomes come together, and a human being will never get any more. It will just develop more and more and more. And so in essence, the conclusion is very simple. To kill a human being would just be the legalization of murder. So the issue became this. The core issue became, is the fetus a human being, just not fully developed human being, or is it a mass of tissue, not unlike some other parts of a woman's body, that she should have every right to do with as she pleases? Now that was the core. In fact, I have a statement here from Planned Parenthood that specifically states to call the fetus a human being is arrogant and absurd. So that was then, and you need to sort of know the history, because what you need to understand is that times have changed. Technology has transformed the argument completely. It used to be, when you got a sonogram, a lot of you ladies have seen those, and guys, you've seen those, and they were sort of the black and white, kind of granularly, and you could see a little baby moving in there and something, but technology moved up to 4D. It's no longer there is a baby that you can feel and you can see and moving in arms and legs. You now have, with technology, a photograph of your child. It's very clear. 85% of all women who see this picture when they have an unplanned pregnancy decide to keep the baby. This is not a fetus, this is a baby. So the argument then began to shift. Let me give you a read from Planned Parenthood. The pro-abortion position now is that we all have many important decisions to make in life. What to do about an unplanned pregnancy is an important and common decision faced by women. In fact, about half of all the women in the United States will have an unplanned pregnancy at some point in their lives. So when you read Planned Parenthood's information now, it is no longer a fetus. They talk about a baby. They talk about a preborn baby. And so the message is, this is the new normal. It's unfortunate. We wish there weren't so many abortions. But for very specific reasons, we need to keep this as a real option. And so it will go on to say then that the real issue in abortion is simply a matter of timing, viability, and what method that you use. Guttmacher Institute is the national and international authority on abortion research and status and statistics. And so this is how they frame. Listen very carefully. This is the messaging of Planned Parenthood. It says the reasons women give for having an abortion underscore their understanding of the responsibilities of parenthood and family life. So in other words, it's being responsible and understanding the impact. So 3 out of 4 women cite their concern for taking care of another person in the family as a reason to abort the baby. 3/4 state that they can't afford another child. 3/4 state that it would interfere with their work, their school, or their ability to care for a dependent. And over half say that this abortion is necessary because they do not want to be a single parent, because they're either unmarried or have conflict with their husband. Now, with that, then, what I want you to do is take a deep breath, and I want to reframe this is the abortion debate today. And I'm going to walk through this, and I'm going to use Planned Parenthood's actual material. I'll use Right to Life material. We will look at some medical evidence. We'll look at the history of abortion, which probably will really surprise you. We'll look at what God says from Scripture. Because here's what you've got to understand. Those 3 stories that I gave, the names were changed to sort of protect the identities of those people. That's real. If you haven't already been faced with that, you will be. And you will need to have an answer that's not what someone else thinks, not what someone else believes. This is a real issue, a core issue of life for all people, but especially followers of Christ. Last night, and I don't know how God works this, but it was just before the service, and I was walking up that aisle, and as I walk up the aisle, a guy stopped me and said, I just want to say something. I've looked at the notes. I see what you're going to speak on tonight. He came pretty early, was sitting next to his wife. He says, if I get up and leave, I just want you to know it's not you. I said, well, what do you mean? He goes, well, my mother was 14 years old when she was pregnant with me. And her entire family and everyone wanted her to abort me. And this 14-year-old was just like a crusader who refused to have me aborted. And every time this subject comes up, and he just started to cry. He goes, it is so emotional for me. And what I want you to get, this isn't about sort of statistics or numbers or theories or political views. This is about life. And then it was very interesting. His wife sitting next to him, she said, well, I'm sure glad she did because I don't know where I'd be without him. And all I want you to know as you listen, as we weigh the evidence, as you evaluate how you would answer that question, it's easy to answer it hypothetically. It's real different when it gets down to a real life situation. And so with that, let's look at the issue. The issue today is that does the preborn baby have an inalienable right to live under any circumstances, or does the mother have the right to terminate her pregnancy to care for her family and her welfare, both present and future? If the preborn baby is human life, then it's inconceivable to take the life of an innocent human being. It amounts to murder. The pro-abortion position has changed. If a preborn baby negatively impacts the mother's mental or physical health or that of the welfare of her family or future, then safe, legal, abortive options must be kept available to that woman. So all I want you to do is realize these are polar opposite views that people are deeply passionate about. Often so passionate they've not only been vocal, but violent with one another. And we need to understand what's the evidence? What's the medical evidence when you look at this? What's the historical evidence, and then what's the biblical evidence? Let me go through and give you a little medical evidence or background on what happens inside of a woman as she's pregnant. The heart begins to beat between the 18th and the 25th day after conception. Brain waves have been recorded as early as 45 days. The baby's movements can be felt by the mother as early as 6 weeks or 42 days. At 8 weeks, the baby possesses the fingerprints that it will have the rest of its life. All the bodily functions, all the systems are present by 8 weeks, and they're functioning by 11 weeks. And at 11 to 12 weeks, a baby can suck its thumb. So there's the medical evidence. That's exactly what's happened in those early weeks up to 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 weeks. Now, interestingly, someone did an evaluation. Harvard Medical School has a criteria for how do you know when someone is dead? Right? I mean, how do you know for sure when someone is dead? So Harvard Medical School has 4 criteria to determine whether someone is dead. And so I'll give those to you. And then what I want to show you is that if you reverse those, it tells you something about when someone is actually alive in the womb. According to Harvard Medical School, the 4 criteria are: 1, no response to external stimuli. In other words, they don't respond to pain. 2, no spontaneous movements or respiratory efforts. 3, no deep reflexes. And 4, no brain activity by a flat electroencephalogram. If you would say to someone, based on that criteria, and did not tell them the age of a preborn baby at 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 weeks, they would say, it's alive. This is a human being. Fully human, just not fully developed. So there's the medical evidence. We're not disagreeing on this anymore.
You're listening to Living on the Edge with Chip Ingram, and Chip will be back in just a minute to finish today's talk. But quickly, this program is only possible because of the generosity of listeners like you. Consider supporting us today by becoming a monthly partner. Learn more by going to livingontheedge.org. That's livingontheedge.org. And thanks for doing whatever God leads you to do. Well, let's rejoin Chip now for the remainder of his message.
Historically then, what's the background on abortion? You might think that, like I did several years ago, the first time I ever heard the word abortion, I have a sister who's a nurse, and I think I was a senior in high school. I'd never heard the word, and she said something about it, and it was right around the Roe versus Wade and all that. I graduated from high school in 1972, and so 73, maybe I was a freshman in college or so, and she gave me all this information, and I did not know what she was talking about. Later, like you, I've seen what's happened in America, and so I thought abortion is like this big issue in America right now. False. 3 different eras of abortion. The first is the Greco-Roman world. Okay, Aristotle, Plato, all the way up through the first 300 years of the church. Abortion and infanticide were just normal. It's just the way it is. And so there was a time of quickening when a woman could feel a baby. And they said that if you could feel the baby and it was thought to be a girl, you could kill the child 40 days and under. If it was a boy, you needed to wait till 90 days. So what you're going to find about the whole abortion issue, it's been exploiting women from all the way back to ancient civilization. If you would take a brand new baby that's born, you could take that baby to the father in the Roman world, and if it was a girl instead of a boy, often it would be automatically killed. If there was some defect for any reason, or the father just didn't want it, he had absolute legal right to kill the child, both in or outside the womb. So what changed? What changed was something called the church was birthed, and the sacredness of life. And it took a few hundred years, but 300 years later, you find that abortion is almost completely eliminated. It becomes a moral code that, because of the church's stand on life. In fact, right after the apostles, there's the church fathers and writings, the Didache, and they passionately argue for the sanctity of human life at every level, post and before a child is born. Well, for about 1,500 years, you don't have much to say about abortion. I'm sure there were some done, secretly or illegally, but it was never mainstream at all until, are you ready for this? The next time abortion gains huge popularity is in the middle of the 1800s in America. 1840 was like a super promiscuous era in the life of America. Most women before that time averaged about 7 children, large families. If you would get a magazine, the New York Gazette at the time had page after page after page of advertisements for abortions. They predict as many as 1/5 to 1/3 of all babies were aborted. 50 years later, they're averaging 3.5 children by the turn of the 20th century. So what stopped abortion then? 2 unusual groups. One, the American Medical Association, which was just developing, and the early feminist movement. The doctors realized they were getting these women who had been through these abortions, and think of the technology or lack of it that they had then. And then it was a time of huge promiscuity in our country. And so, as is today, men were covering their tracks, or women were covering their tracks of promiscuity, and so abortion was basically birth control. Those two groups came together, and by the turn of the century, there were laws on the books where there was absolutely no abortion in America. It was about 1967 to 1969, there was a sense that there was a need for therapeutic abortions. In other words, if there was a case where maybe the child versus the mother's life, and so they argued for a law to allow therapeutic abortions. Well, you turn very quickly, that moves to the Supreme Court, Roe v. Wade. We're an interesting species that is destroying itself. There is yet another group that has become pro-life, at least a portion of it. In fact, the late Christopher Hitchens, when asked, "Are you pro-life?" said affirmatively, yes. He repeatedly defended using the term unborn child against those, these are his words, on the left who say an aborted fetus is nothing more than a growth, an appendix, or a polyp. Unborn child seems to me to be a real concept. It's not a growth. He says you can't say that the issue of rights don't come into question. Now, I don't know about you, but when atheists are pro-life and they're adamant that it has nothing to do with God, they're adamant it has nothing to do with religion. In fact, they have harsh words to say why they think religious people are pro-life. But what they're saying logically is, how could a species kill itself? As I met that man, it just struck me last night. He's 48 years old, and you think about, what if his life wasn't there? Well, then that wife wouldn't be there, and if the wife wouldn't be there, then their kids wouldn't be there. If their kids wouldn't be there, then you start doing the dominoes, and you start thinking, this is, in all likelihood, the most important moral issue, not just of our day, but in all history. I remember as a young Christian, I didn't grow up as a Christian. I never read the Bible. I didn't understand it when I started to. I read the New Testament a couple, 3 times before I could ever try, like the big part, the early part, the Old Testament. But I'll never forget reading the Old Testament, and in some of those obscure passages, it talks about the Canaanites and these weird people, and God is judging them. And then it actually said some of them would take their children and they would sacrifice them, which, by the way, still happens today. And they thought they would appease the God's anger by putting their babies in the fire. And I remember thinking, I'm like 19 years old, I've been a Christian a year, I'm thinking, that's insane. How could anybody how could anybody kill your own baby? How bizarre, how barbaric. And then I just think about, we've got it in spades. But we just have different gods. Our gods are the gods of convenience. The gods of got to finish school. The gods of can't afford this. The gods of I don't want my life messed up. This is a profound issue for God's people, and I would remind you, it's not out there.
This is Living on the Edge with Chip Ingram, and you've been listening to part 1 of Chip's message, Understanding Abortion, from our series, Caring Enough to Confront. Chip will be back shortly to share some helpful application for us to think about. Our world right now can be characterized by one word: divided. There's a dangerous us versus them mindset out there that's invading every aspect of society. And unfortunately, even in the name of holiness, Christians have begun thinking this way too. So when confronted with the hot-button issues of our day, how should followers of Jesus respond? In this vital series, we'll learn the true meaning of being salt and light. Join us as we explore what the Bible says about topics like abortion, politics, and sexuality, and how we are to lead with grace when we engage with those with different beliefs. You're not going to want to miss a single program. Also, throughout this series, Chip and our guest teachers mention many resources to educate you about what's happening in our world and prepare you to respond in a Christ-like way. We've gathered all of these resources together for you, so check out the entire list right now at livingontheedge.org. That's livingontheedge.org. Well, Chip's joined me in studio now, and Chip, I don't know if many people know this, but you still travel across the country to preach in various places. And as you get the chance to interact with various people across the country, talk about the common struggles you're noticing, and then share what this ministry is doing to encourage believers everywhere.
I'd be glad to, Dave. As I travel around the United States and speak at churches, college campuses, pastors' conferences, military personnel, there is one theme that just keeps coming out. It doesn't matter where I speak or who I'm with. It's the family, it's communication, and it's relationships. Now, here's the thing. There's a lot that goes into building a strong family, great communication, and doing that for different groups is certainly a challenge. But that's why we're committed to continuing to teach the Bible regularly, practically, and relevantly. We're committed to develop group resources and online courses that help people personally apply the truth to their life. And we're committed to having fun with families and creating tools that allow families to get together and enjoy one another and share their hearts. Each one of those has their place. And here's what I would ask you. Would you be willing to help us create these and then get them in the hands of families all across America? It takes resources. And I'm so grateful for those of you that pray and partner with us financially, and I want to thank you first. And second, if you don't partner with us financially now, would you consider partnering financially and helping us do what families desperately need? Thanks so much for praying about it and then doing whatever God shows you to do.
Great encouragement, Chip. So if you'd like to be part of growing this ministry, prayerfully consider becoming a monthly partner. Your gift will go places and accomplish ministry work like you wouldn't believe. So set up a monthly donation today at livingontheedge.org or by calling 888-333-6003. That's 888-333-6003 or livingontheedge.org. App listeners tap donate. Well, here again is Chip to share some application for us to think about.
As we wrap up today's program, I am often amused sometimes to hear people get very defensive and talk about how this is such a big political issue. And even recently, it's become a much more political issue in our day with some of the events that have occurred in our country. But I want to talk to those of you that when you heard today's message, it doesn't feel political at all. In fact, it feels sad, and maybe some memories of shame or guilt. If 6 out of 10 women, or almost 7 out of 10 women that have an abortion, self-identify as followers of Jesus, what I know is there's a lot of women right now and a lot of men whose wives or girlfriends had an abortion and took away the son or daughter that you long to have. Or you were that man that in a moment of time, if you could turn back the clock and if you could just say, oh, no, don't kill that baby. What was I thinking? I was thinking so short-sighted. I didn't know what I know now. You would give anything to turn back the time when you encouraged that woman to have an abortion. There's a lot of hurt out there. When I finished this message, I interviewed 2 ladies, one that had an abortion earlier in her life. She had stuffed it for over 20 years. She had been through significant depression and now counsels women and created an entire curriculum for women and men to go through the process and the grief and the pain of what happens when people abort a baby and really come to understand it's a baby. I mean, both sides believe it's a baby, okay? I mean, that debate is over. Planned Parenthood talks about a baby. And I just want to say there's forgiveness. There's a God who loves you. There's a God who, like any other sin, would say to you, I want you to come to me and I want you to tell me and turn from the sin that you've committed and not live under the guilt and the shame and the condemnation. And I want you to come to me and ask me to forgive you because I want to and I will. Jesus died for all your sins and all of mine. And let me encourage you, too, that the freedom will not be experienced until you find a safe person that you can say, as another woman later told me, I've never shared this with anyone. I'm a leader in the church. I teach women's Bible studies. But when I heard that woman up front talk about a 20-year abortion in her past, I realized I've never dealt with mine. Would you find someone? Would you call someone? Would you have coffee with someone today or this week and get this out in the open and let God forgive you and restore you?
Incredible word, Chip. Thanks. As we close, would you pray for those feeling challenged to respond to Chip's words right now? There's always a spiritual tension when we feel prompted to act on something God is stirring in our hearts. Thanks for taking a minute to do that. And if there's a way we can pray for you, let us know. Call 888-333-6003 or email chip@livingontheedge.org. We'd love to hear from you. Well, be sure to join us next time as Chip continues our newest series, Caring Enough to Confront. Until then, I'm Dave Drury, saying thanks for listening to this edition of Living on the Edge.
Thanks so much for watching this video. If you'd like to watch more content like this, click and subscribe here to our channel. And by the way, if you'd like to know more about Living on the Edge, find out about more resources, maybe get on the mailing list, go to livingontheedge.org. See you next time.